The United Nations chamber held its breath. No cough, no shuffle. Only the dense weight of expectation pressing down on the room. The doors opened and every head turned. Ibrahim Traoré walked toward the podium without a printed speech, without the practiced smile of diplomacy. His face was set, his stride was steady. He carried himself like a man sent to speak for more than himself, for a continent. He did not bow, he did not flatter. He skipped the soft opening lines that fill time and avoid truth. His first words hit like a storm front, short, direct, loaded with memory. Each line carried the weight of chains broken and chains still hidden. Delegates shifted. Translators paused to catch up. Cameras crept in tight. Something rare was happening in a room that usually smothers urgency with procedure. For half a century, the story told to Africa was simple. Wait your turn. Keep quiet. Accept the terms written elsewhere. Survive on rules drafted without you. That script burned away the moment he began. This was not a plea for mercy. It was a notice, an alert that patience had an end and the end had arrived. Then came the number that froze the hall. $847 billion. He let it sit, not as a slogan, as an invoice, not aid, not charity, not loans with strings. Wealth removed through colonial currency traps, predatory pricing, and systems branded as partnership. He traced it with clean lines. The CFA franc locking budgets to Paris. Gold and cocoa sold for far below fair value. Profits routed to offshore shells in London and beyond. Since 1960, he said, this is what Africa lost. He pointed to audits. He cited reports. It was not theater, it was accounting. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward. Some frowned. Some stared down at their folders. For once, the exploited did not speak in vague pain. They named the bill. The warning that followed stiffened necks across the row of flags. Africa will not keep sitting inside an order built on extraction. Either the bill is addressed or Africa walks. What happens when a whole continent stops pretending rules it never wrote are fair? What happens when consent is withdrawn? The room cracked open. 32 African delegations rose at once. Hands met in a wall of sound that rolled for 12 minutes without breaking. Seats from Latin America and Asia stood too. The applause bounced off stone and glass. On the western side of the hall, the quiet was louder than any noise. Tight faces, hands folded, the mirror of history turned back on those who hung it. This time, Africa was not asking to squeeze one more chair around a table nailed to the floor. It was ready to flip the table and build a new one. Tone shifted. Ceremony gave way to confrontation dressed in facts. Traoré said the obvious thing no one says in that room. Too often, the UN had shielded the strong, smoothed invasions with language, managed injustice with statements, and called it order. He spoke in dates and totals. Gold losses near $285 billion. Uranium shipped in quiet to light foreign cities while villages that mined it sat in the dark. Cotton and manganese pulled out cheap while budgets bent under interest. Each figure landed like a judge's hammer. A record was being made, not a panel, a docket. He moved from charge to action. He pressed for an international tribunal to pursue the $847 billion from France. Not a plea, a demand for restitution. The posture changed. Africa was not a victim telling a sad story. It was a claimant with receipts. The hall became a courtroom in all but name. Every delegate a juror. Every silence a risk. The accused were not people in the room. The accused were systems cloaked in the language of help. He raised his voice. No more apologies buried in textbooks. We demand payment in the open reactions split along familiar lines. Latin America nodded. Asia watched with care and recognition. Western rows sat motionless, weighing angles. The math cut through posture. $847 billion equals more than $3,000 for every African alive today. Enough to fund schools, clinics, roads, power, and factories for a generation. Even skeptics had to face the simple question. If this much was drained, who would Africa be today without the drain? Across the continent, people watching on phones and radios felt something more than politics. It was release, a saying of the thing everyone knew. Poverty had been called fate, culture, or bad luck. He called it what it was, organized extraction. For elites in Western capitals, the moment was dangerous for a different reason. He did not speak in grief alone, he spoke in law. If Africa framed its case as legal claims, facts and figures attached, the model could spread. From Africa to Latin America to parts of Asia, and even within Europe where empires wrote the first drafts, the floor trembled, not from noise, but from accountability arriving at the door. Then he cut to the structure that makes avoidance easy. If the UN hosts debates, why not trials? If it can sanction the weak, why not compensate the robbed? The question stripped the ceremony from the institution. Either law binds power or power is the only law. He set down the hardest line. If justice is denied, Africa will withdraw from this United Nations. We will not remain in an institution that blesses exploitation while muting our voice. Gasps snapped around the hall. People realized they were present at a hinge in the building's history. He did not soften. He turned to the Security Council and spoke plain truth. A dictatorship of 5 from a war 8 decades ago. Why should 1.3 billion Africans bow to a veto granted to yesterday's winners? He read the roll of wars that broke nations and spilled out across borders. Libya shattered after airstrikes. Iraq bled while trillions left Washington's treasury. Afghanistan occupied for 20 years, then dropped. Syria torn by proxies. He did not call them missteps. He called them proof that power without restraint writes outcomes and pays no bill. He laid costs next to claims. If trillions exist for war, why is justice for Africa always marked impossible? Silence followed. No Western mic rushed to answer. For people across Africa, one fact stood tall. No leader had ever threatened to lead a walkout like this. If reform cannot happen inside, exit becomes a tool. The African Union, AES states, and BRICS all offer new anchors. Trade and diplomacy would tilt if a continent changes docks. He flipped participation into leverage. A seat is not a prize, it is a trade. If the trade is crooked, stand up and leave. Reparations or exit, justice or fracture. Was this the first step toward leaving the old frame? Or a clean pressure move to force the room to deal in facts? The answer was not clear yet, but the effect was. He grounded every claim in the record. UN General Assembly 1514, the Declaration on Independence for Colonial Territories. He reminded the room that the UN had already called colonialism a crime. He pointed to the International Court of Justice's Chagos opinion and other rulings on restitution. He tied the $847 billion to legal principles, not slogans. Sovereignty violated, self-determination denied, resources taken under compulsion. The message was simple. Reparations are not gifts, they are repayment. He did the currency conversion that media understands. The total equals a large slice of a major deficit. Put it in ordinary terms, it becomes impossible to wave away. Shift the ground from moral pain to enforceable claims. Make the West answer to the tools it built. The split outside the room formed fast. Havana, Caracas, Tehran, Moscow, Brasilia. Support poured in. China and India framed it as a needed reset. Together they spoke for almost 3 billion people. The line was clear. The $847 billion was not theater. It was economics. On the other side, Washington, Paris, London, Berlin issued careful concern and loaded phrases about stability. Few dared to contest the numbers on camera. They knew the gold. They knew the uranium. They knew the crops. Trading screens and import logs remember what talking points forget. Analysts in New York and Frankfurt did their own math. If Africa coordinates policy and price, supply chains move. Shocks measured in hundreds of billions are possible. The South saw justice, the West saw hazard. Underneath both views sat a harder truth. Rules for the century ahead are not fixed. He went at the lenders next. The IMF and World Bank do not guard progress. They police dependence. He described a loop of loans with interest that eats futures. Projects padded by contractors who fly home richer while host nations carry the bill. Numbers again. About $50 billion leaves Africa each year in debt service. More than many states can spend on health and classrooms. He called it what it looks like from the ground. Not development, a legal pipe that drains. The room murmured. Delegates from the global south recognized the pattern. Austerity that cuts the poor first. Privatizations that sell public goods at a loss. Commodity traps that keep budgets fragile and export lists short. Western Cites had to sit with facts tied to their own signatures. He did not end at exposure. He moved to build. Tearing down the old is not enough. We will raise a new frame. The current went from fury to design. He laid out 4 pillars. First, a Global South Assembly. No permanent members, no vetoes. One country, one vote. Decisions by law, not privilege. Small islands equal beside large economies. A table built level from the start. Second, a development bank with clean terms. No austerity triggers baked into loans. No forced privatization. Funds released for projects that serve people, not balance sheets abroad. He pointed to $88 billion a year lost to illicit flows from Africa. Stop the leak in seed capital appears for rails, hospitals, and clean power. Third, a reparations court, a body dedicated to theft dressed as policy, colonial plunder, debt fraud, environmental damage codified in contracts. The $847 billion claim would be the opening case. Evidence already cataloged. Losses traced by commodity and year. Those who gain pay, not vengeance. Settlement. Fourth, a security council without veto power. The 5 that hold the old keys cannot lock the new doors. Leadership rotates. Votes stand on the record. No single nation able to block the world to shield itself. Then he set an anchor in time and place. December 15, 2025. Ouagadougou. Not Geneva, not New York. The invitation ran both practical and symbolic. If the world wants a fair table, come to one built in Africa. People in the hall did the scale math fast. The states ready to attend could represent over 4.5 billion people and trillions in combined output. A coalition large enough to be more than a protest. Western diplomacy moved fast behind curtains. Offers of aid, debt relief with fine print, new bridges and roads. At the same time, old tools rattled. Threats of sanctions, frozen lines of credit, warned investment downgrades, 2 hands, one with gifts, one with pressure. The playbook looked familiar with new packaging. Media in Washington and Paris downplayed the plan, called it unrealistic, framed it as division. The volume of coverage gave away the worry. If it were nothing, it would be ignored. Commentators who praised choice in theory condemned these choices in practice. On the streets in Dakar, Lagos, and Caracas, the response felt tangible. Hashtags rose. Ouaga 2025. No more veto. Students debated currency swaps and regional settlement systems. Market traders talked about using national units in cross-border deals. For families watching prices climb, the idea of finance that does not bleed them was not theory. It was the difference between meals and hunger. Traders in New York and London watched flows change in real data. Gold shipments rerouted to the east. Bulk deals signed with India and China. The map of who buys and who sets price began to bend. Reality moves ahead of rhetoric. Markets follow incentives. The lines were clear. On one side, promises and threats. On the other, a continent choosing to stand up. The date was set. The choice would be public. Analysts sketch 3 near paths. Failure. The summit breaks under pressure. Leaders peel off for short-term relief. Old rivalries reopen. The idea dissolves. The cost is heavy. The continent returns to institutions that set rates from abroad. Debt stacks past $700 billion. Interest bites into health and education. The lesson taught is the one the old order once taught. Do not try. Success. The summit holds. 50 to 70 states sign charters. A bank opens without austerity hooks. A tribunal begins to hear claims. A parallel order rises beside the UN. Trade patterns shift. Credit ratings adjust. Legitimacy no longer belongs to one building in one city. The world becomes 2 tables and a road between them. Success under fire. The frame stands and sanctions hit. Reserves abroad get frozen. Access to SWIFT narrows. Tech exports slow. Inflation spikes. Short pain spreads. Yet a different process begins. Leaks close. Local settlement grows. The CFA link weakens. Supply chains pivot south and east. Hardship turns into muscle. Independence takes root because there is no other option. In all three, Africa is not the object moved by others. Africa is the mover. People have a name for it already. Second, independence. Not the flag kind, the budget kind. Banks in Shanghai, Moscow, and New Delhi scoped credit lines, swaps, bullion buys. Wall Street warned of risk, but also watched cobalt, lithium, and uranium with care. You cannot build a green future without the minerals under African ground. Beyond money, the human line runs straight. Citizens see in Traoré's stance their own long patience turning into action. If Ouagadougou fails, it will hurt in ways charts cannot measure. If it holds through pressure, the fire it lights will be hard to put out. The room where he spoke will return to its normal quiet. Yet the echo of one number and one threat will hang. 847 billion is no longer a talking point. It is a banner. The question is not whether Africa was wronged. The question is whether the world is prepared to right what it owes. Some will call Ouaga 2025 a footnote. Others will call it Bandung Reborn, a gathering where the South remembered that it can be a subject of history, not an object. In law, the path is marked. Resolutions exist. Precedents exist. In economics, the stakes are clear. Trade, credit, and prices move with policy. In politics, the meaning is sharper. Africa is done asking for a chair. It is inviting the world to a new room. So the ending is not an ending. It is an open door. Can Africa design the frame for a fair order? Can the South turn anger into assemblies, pain into plans, and dignity into rules people can touch? This is not finished. This is the first page. Share it. Argue it. Write your part in it. History is moving, and the sound you hear is a continent standing up.